Well, we'd like to welcome Jake Furr, sports writer for the Mansfield News Journal and good friend of mine and also of the Overreach Report. So Jake, over the past few weeks, we've had some of my assistant coaches come in. We've had Greg Collins, Steve Gray, and Tom Foster. And then last week we brought Charlie Scott in as an official. And I think it's always interesting to hear, even in interviews I do with coaches for each week, is kind of like what inspired them to be a coach, and then like with Charlie, what inspired you to be official, and then kind of that journey to where you're at now. So I guess maybe turn it over to you and let you talk a little about how you had an interest in becoming a sports writer, and then kind of the journey of how you became a writer here for the Mansfield News Journal.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of started as a young age. I was a little kid. My bedroom wall would have all kinds of newspaper clippings. I really didn't put those two together until I really started thinking about it, but just I had newspaper clippings of I grew up in Plymouth, so the Big Red were really good back in the late 90s. So I had all those things plastered all over my wall. I read it was the Plymouth Advertiser back then. It's kind of defunct now. It's not a paper anymore, but had those all over my wall, and just I always looked forward to seeing those pictures and reading those stories when I was a kid. And I even had a picture of Benji Hall on one of my walls too. From the News Journal. He was his neighbor. My neighbor was his uncle and his cousin, so I kind of grew up with those guys and knew them from
glad Benji decided to move from Plymouth to Ontario.
I don't know where that jurisdiction line, where that kind of butted up.
All I know is this, and I really never knew about that until Denny Bartlett was at Madison, and I think Benji maybe moved when he was in 5th grade or 6th grade. And Denny Bartlett, I think we played, he goes, "Hey, you got a kid coming in that's going to be an all-Ohio player." And I was like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, Denny." He goes, "No, Joe, this kid's going to be really good."
Yeah.
Well, and he was.
Yeah, he was something else. And, and just kind of loving the game of basketball, really, that's kind of what got me into the love of sports writing. I still cover football, baseball, softball, kind of all those sports, but, this is the time of year that I absolutely love. And, I went to school. And I went to high school and was kind of on that school newspaper. We really didn't do a whole lot in those classes. As much of me and my friends over in the corner just playing cards, kind of.
Good euchre players?
Yeah, we played some euchre, played a bunch of different games and stuff. And then I just kind of, I was a player in high school, and my sophomore year I was interviewed by Rob McCurdy after one of our district championship wins. And I was just like, man, that's really cool. For me, it just felt really cool to kind of be in the paper. I was in the paper, and then I was like, that guy kind of has a cool job. So since then, I've always wanted to do that. Went to school, went to college for professional writing and in English. Got a double major in that.
Where'd you go to school?
Ohio State.
Okay.
And graduated from there in 2013. Started freelancing a little bit for kind of the papers around here, the News Journal, Telegraph Forum over in Bucyrus. 2015 rolls around, and I get a full-time gig at the Bucyrus Telegraph Forum, where I spent about a year and a half covering the good Colonel Crawford basketball teams over there. That was an exceptional year of basketball when Buckeye Central had Grant Loy and Winford had some really good teams. So I spent about a year and a half there. Went to Norwalk at the Reflector. Worked there for a year. Really enjoyed it just because I was kind of back in the Firelands Conference, back home, kind of where I grew up. Was able to cover Plymouth a little bit. I loved the area, loved the kids, loved the coaches. Just didn't really care for the job. I was a sports editor now, so everything was on my plate, and it was just a lot of long nights and long weekends, and just kind of, suffered through that year and kind of got done with it. And I actually left the profession for about 5-6 months before I landed a job at the Mansfield News Journal, and been there ever since. That's kind of where I always wanted to be, and I'm super happy where I'm at.
Well, I mean, from the standpoint, I think people in this area are glad you're here.
Yeah.
I guess, I remember when I first started coaching, they had 4 sports writers that, teams were covered every night they played, and then we went through a lull there where it didn't seem like we got much, and now we're kind of back that, you're doing a job and really highlighting not just basketball, but just neat stories throughout. Yeah. So as a coach, when I got into coaching, I've said this many times, my high school coach was a big influence on me, and Coach Gail Doherty and Joe Campoli at Northern were big influences. And then, you know, as I was growing up, Bob Knight was kind of the guy, so that was influence. But then as you continue coaching, you kind of, you know, you would follow people, like people brought up Coach K, Jay Wright, and even guys maybe you haven't heard of, but you try to steal stuff. But I guess being a sports writer, is there anybody like that you, I guess, maybe try to model your writing after, or has really influenced you in what you do?
Absolutely, and it's mostly the local guys that are around here. I don't read a ton of national stuff. You know, I kind of stay away from the kind of the bigger picture stuff just because I feel like you can get that information anywhere. But, you know, John Spencer, who is an absolute legend, who still I get to work with him still a little bit here and there. He influenced me a lot. Rob McCurdy, as I said. You know, when I was a young writer over at Bucyrus, I scheduled something with Rob to sit down and be like, hey, can you look over this story or look over these stories? Just tell me what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, and just kind of give me that guidance. And he's been a godsend to me, to my career, and I owe him a lot. But working with John Spencer still, I think I model most of my writing after him just because it's super long and super wordy, and people are still scrolling and thinking the story's over, which I still have to work on that. But John is a pro at, you know, the getting every single detail out of a story. So yeah, really look up to him quite a bit.
Do you ever, like now, like when you write a story, like send it to somebody maybe like John, or go, hey, just look at this and see what you think?
I don't do that very much often. We kind of have like an editor system where we're at now, so they kind of look at it. It's a bunch of people kind of around the country that look at it right now, but I absolutely would if John would be open to that, because there's kind of no better teacher than the guy that knows you and knows your writing.
I mean, I just bring that up because I remember, like, I think when Rob Sheldon got out, I had him come to a practice, I think, or maybe watch us in a game, just said, hey, can you, and when I retired, I was going through all the stuff I had, and I had like a folder, a Winford folder, and I remember I pulled this out, and it was like, the first thing was like, hey man, you might be as good as I've seen you defensively in the past few years. He goes, but there was like, what the heck are you guys doing offensively? And it was like 10 things of what I needed to correct. So I think that's always interesting. So you've been a sports writer, but so what's what do you enjoy most about it?
Just kind of being out in the community and being with the kids and highlighting the kids, because, you know, I know how it felt to be one of those kids that were highlighted in the paper, so I just kind of want to pass that on. That's my all-time favorite thing, is just kind of promoting kids and coaches and making sure that their successes are recognized, and, you know, people, you know, even if there's only a couple people that read it, it at least gets it in front of their faces. Because, you know, they work really hard. They're student athletes. They have a lot on their plate as teenagers who are trying to figure out their lives with, you know, what's next for college. And, you know, anytime you can say, hey, you know, this guy saw something in me and you know, highlighted that. I mean, that's the highlight of my career is highlighting those kids and their accomplishments. I went to the museum in Washington, D.C. It's been maybe 3-4 years ago, and, you know, they have, like, it's a big museum of just kind of the world events that have happened in history, and then off in the corner they have like this little sports section where you can kind of go in and watch a little film, and it's just like a, you know, 2-minute little jog around. And on the wall it said, you know, if you want to see a person's failures, read the front page. If you want to see someone's successes, flip to the sports page. So that's kind of that's how I've always kind of approached the job. If, you know, there's a lot of negativity in the world, but sports is, you know, sports has that high priority.
As I've always asked coaches, then the favorite part, flip the coin. What's a least favorite part of being a sports writer?
Least favorite part might be after games. I love going to games, and I love watching them, and I love talking to kids. But then after the game, it's like, you know, people think that, you know, you just go home and you're done. And, you know, as coaches, you kind of know you're not done for another 3 or 4 hours. You got to write, you got to upload pictures, you got to do a whole lot of things. So it's a lot of late nights, and it's usually on Friday and Saturday night when you
So typically, like if you do a game, well, like you did the Lucas game last night.
Yeah.
So typically, maybe describe like what do you do? What's that process, and like how long it takes you?
So I got home from the Lucas game probably maybe 9:30ish, I think, and sat down and turned on my recorder and transcribed all the interviews, which I interviewed 3 different people, so it takes a little while. That's the longest part of the night is transcribing interviews and making sure you get kind of quotes where you want them and correct. Then you just kind of build your story from there. So I sat down and wrote my story, waited for the photos to come in. Luckily, I didn't have to take my own pictures last night, or it would have been a longer night. Eric Marshall helps me out a ton with that. So got the pictures in, loaded those up, kind of built how I wanted the story to look online, published it, filed it away to whoever needed to read it, and shared it on social media. And then I went back and tracked down all the results from everywhere else, all the other games, because I have a running scoreboard where you can find all the scores. So tracked down those, typed all those up. I mean, it's a long process. Probably around midnight I finished up, which is an early night, an earlier night than normal. On football Friday nights, I usually punch out around 3 a.m.
Wow.
It takes a long time just to kind of round up everything else, because it has to be kind of that night too.
So do you have like a deadline you have to meet at a certain time to get articles in now, or not?
Not necessarily.
Like you used to, I mean, like,
yeah.
Probably when you first started, you did.
When I first started, it was like 9:30 p.m. We had to have something turned around for the next day's paper. But now we print 2 days later. So like our deadline is like noon the following day. So it's kind of old news when it gets in, but you read it right away online.
It still covers. Yeah. I mean, I just asked that because you remember Bob Fisher, bless his soul.
Absolutely.
He wrote part-time, and he used to cover us a lot. And I think at one time we won like 17 games in a row when he covered us. So anytime he walked in, we were like, yeah. and then I remember like a game would end if it went to an overtime or something. He had to get it in by a certain time, and he would go, hey, John, I'm just going to put a couple quotes in. And I wouldn't have been said, so the next day I'm reading that this is what Coach Balogh said. He was always right on. He was really good.
Yeah.
As a sports writer, you've done a lot of different things in a short amount of time. So, one of the things I think I talked to you about this last night was, I came across the thing where Nick Saban, it was entitled "Tell Me a Story," and Saban kind of told a story about how a lesson he learned as a 15-year-old when he was coaching. So, going to kind of turn it to you, and maybe if you got a couple stories that would maybe our people would enjoy. So tell us a story.
Yeah, it's being in a sports writing position and going to kind of all these events, you kind of run across some funny things, and growing up in the community, you make those relationships. So it was I probably shouldn't say it now, but whatever. I'm not going to get fired for it. But back when I was a freelancer at the News Journal, I got to follow Plymouth around for a little while. That's when they had a really, really good team. They're making a long tournament run, and covered them in some games. But I knew Troy Keane really well. He grew up across the street from me. I've known his family. I've known him since I was born, and all the neighborhood kids would come to our driveway because we had one of the only hoops on the street, and they would all play. And I was, just a little 3-year-old kid just sitting there watching them. But he was coach of Plymouth in that time, and I would interview him after the games, and we knew each other really well. And he was like after a little bit, he just said, "You know what? Just don't make me say anything stupid, and don't make the other team look bad. Put in whatever you want." So I was actually, like Bob Fisher, was creating some quotes for Troy Keane and kind of the biggest games in those schools' history. So
who was that? Was that Carissa Thompson or somebody? Who was that said she made up stuff?
Right, yeah, on the sideline. So that was when I was a freelancer. I wasn't full time then, so I'm not liable.
We can't go back.
Right. And then, I get to go to a lot of games with my dad now. He's retired, and, he comes with me to quite a few. We went to the Colonel Crawford regional game a couple years ago, I think, when they played OG in the regional.
Oh, at Bowling Green.
Over at Bowling Green. And, I used the media entrance. He bought a ticket, but he didn't want to have to go all the way around. So I was like, just come with me. Maybe they'll let you in. And I assigned a photographer to go to that game, but he couldn't go. So when I walked in, I was like, this is so-and-so. And he's got a media pass right there. So he was like, he just grabbed his media pass, put it on. He was sitting with me in the press row. So I've got them into quite a few games that way too. So it's, just enjoy that part, just taking my dad everywhere we go.
Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that appreciate the work that you do and continue to do that. So kind of next on the docket, I brought you in that girls tournament starts next week.
Yeah,
So we were going to kind of try to take a look at some of the brackets of the tournament. So I don't know we can begin with maybe the Division 4s, but one of the best Division 4 teams in the state that we kind of cover in this area is Loudonville.
Yeah.
In looking at their bracket there in the Northeast, looks like they got a pretty good run to get into the regional.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you had a chance to see them play or.
I haven't, but just kind of being around the game, I follow them quite. Follow anybody who's doing well quite a bit. Corey Vermillion. I talked to Scott Sellers about her. I talked to Mansfield Seniors coach about her, and they're all just like, what, she is legit. I mean, she is one of a kind. So, that's going to be a fun run for them. And I think if they get out of that district, I think their regional. Even getting to the probably regional final looks like a pretty good possibility there for them too.
They match up with Richmond Heights.
Right.
I talked to Tyler Bates last night on the phone. He had some questions, and he said he was seeing Richmond Heights, I think, for the 4th time. So,
right. Yeah.
So as coaches, we're always trying to play that step ahead.
Yeah.
But let's take a look at that Division 4 girls district, as we kind of take a look at that, I guess it's kind of the one thing that I guess kind of interesting to me was that the 2, 3, and 4 seeds all took byes, and then the best team, Danbury Lakeside, the one decided to play. I'm always interested to maybe see your opinion of what you feel about teams playing. Deciding to play or not to play.
As a player, I think I would want to be on the court.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I think it was my junior year. We lost in the sectional final. We were the number 1 seed and lost in the sectional final to Lucas. We took a bye, and we were kind of, it was just kind of a weird stretch of just off days where we were practicing, we were beating up on each other, we were annoying each other, just being around each other all the time, and rather go out and try and beat up on somebody else. But it's kind of a coach's preference. I always trust what a coach does.
Well, and it was interesting is I got later in coaching. A lot of times I would not necessarily sit with the whole team, but especially if you had seniors that you really trusted, would sit down and say, hey, what? Even before we went to the draw, we'd go, hey, that's looking like, we're going to choose between these 2 teams to go at. What do you want to do? And, in most cases, I think you're right. They would say, hey, we would love to play on Tuesday and play on Friday. So that's interesting. But, Danbury looks like the best team in that. So let's take a look at the Division 3, which I think that's going to be really interesting at Shelby because you have some really great matchups. The first, if you take a look there at the top, we have Winford matching up with Bucyrus, and it's a game that about probably 3 weeks ago now. I mean, Winford had been playing really well, and Bucyrus knocked them off. And then if Winford would win that, they get to match up with Colonel Crawford, a team that they knocked off.
Right.
So I think that's really interesting. But I think the team I think in that upper bracket that I think has a chance to really make a run is Clear Fork.
Yeah, I think Clear Fork is playing really, really, really well right now. But yeah, like talk about that little top half there. I mean, that's a Crawford County sports writer's dream right there in that situation. You get all that. So, and Winford, has a really young team and is really good. Colonel Crawford obviously has been playing well, but yeah, I think.
Well, and the people in the N10 have just kind of been beating up on each other in the second half of the season.
Right. But yeah, Clear Fork, I mean, the way it kind of shook out, it was almost like everybody thought Clear Fork would be the 2 seed because you got, the 10 had to go there, the 9 decided, we're going to play them in the sectional final. The kind of a 2 lower seeds there. So, but I think Clear Fork. And if I was betting, I think I would take them to a district final to play.
And then you got to play
Margaretta.
Probably play Margaretta if everything plays out. And I think Margaretta just continue to move up in the AP poll. And I mean, team that brought a lot back from last year, team that got to the Final Four. Both boys and girls are having great years. Yeah. And then let's take a look at the Division II bracket. And kind of much like the boys, I think that Division II bracket's going to be loaded.
Yeah.
You have Mansfield Senior matching up with Ontario at the top. And then I think you brought this up, and I'll let you talk a little bit about it, but Port Clinton and Mansfield win. That's an interesting matchup.
That's going to be a very, very good matchup, I think. I mean, that top bracket, I feel like there's going to be some really good sectional final games. Port Clinton, what you guys mentioned, DC Lenore. Yep. She can pop off for 25 on any given night.
And I think that's one of the things in the tournament. Many times you see those teams that have that really good player, they just kind of rise to the top and the game goes. And she has a lot of experience, playing in the tournament.
Yeah, and I mean, senior high, they play some really, really great defense, and they're kind of finding their footing here lately. Offensively, they started out like gangbusters offensively, and then kind of hit a lull in the middle of the season where they weren't, I think they had 5 or 6 straight games where they didn't score over 50 points. Then kind of turned it around lately. So.
And then the bottom part of that bracket's interesting too, because you have Shelby, who was the 3, so they chose to go up. But then the other interesting part is Toledo Central Catholic's at 6.
Yeah. So that's an interesting story.
Well, you want to tell the story?
Yeah, I will. But I can understand where Shelby goes there because they only lost the senior by 2.
Right.
So I think they kind of like that matchup better than maybe going against Bellevue. But yeah, Central Catholic didn't show up for the draw.
Well, my understanding was they couldn't. It's done by Zoom or whatever. They couldn't get in.
Okay.
And then they were calling, and the tournament director said, "We're going with the draw." And then somebody called me and asked me, and I said, "Well, why didn't you just go on the phone call?" And it was Natalie. She goes, "I don't know why they didn't."
Right.
So actually, then I think I talked to the Northwest District Director, Kevin Calvert, and I said, "Hey, can you explain this to me?" Because my understanding, when we did tournament draw, if you didn't show up, you were the last one. He said, No. He said they put him on the bracket, but he goes, they put him in the wrong place because the guy said, "Well, they're the 6th seed, they're going on line 6."
Right.
Which he said that's not true. Now they have, in the background, an NCAA bracketing, and if a team wouldn't show up, they would put them on there where the NCAA bracketing is. So, I mean, the big thing is, you wonder with Toledo Central Catholic, the kind of league schedule the schedule they play, but number 2 is they're going to have a long trip to play at Shelby too.
Yeah, Shelby's going to get 2 teams that have to drive probably 2.5 hours to get there. So with Toledo Woodward and Toledo Central Catholic. So that's going to be on their side, but that's going to be a tough little sectional final there.
Well, then we take a look at the bottom of it. Of course, Bellevue, they've won 10 in a row. I think we mentioned they're at Norwalk, I think, tonight. They're playing really well. They would, be the odds-on favorite to come out of that. But the interesting part then, if you go all the way towards the bottom, you have Lexington, who just knocked off Shelby last night. It seems to be playing well. And then you have Norwalk at number 4. That could be an interesting, sectional final there.
Yeah, and Lexington's actually playing really, really well right now. I'm excited to see what they do. They're going to finish the season. They finished the season 500. That's first time since their coach is now Gabby Stover. That was the first time they've done that since she was a player, winning the OCC Player of the Year. So, but what makes this bracket so interesting is just how unfamiliar everybody is, kind of with a lot of different teams. You're not going to be able to scout a Toledo team, and they're not going to be able to scout you. So it's almost like you're going to see each other for the first time in the biggest game of the year.
Which next week we talk about the boys, that Division II.
Each other.
They're going to know. Most of them have played at least once. Some could play 3 times.
Right.
That's going to be interesting. So, as always, as you mentioned earlier, this is the fun part of the year.
Yeah.
And I guess for me now, not coaching, it's even more fun because I'm not getting grayer hair or sleeping less. It's because I don't think people understand the preparation that goes in that most teams try to do to prepare for the tournament. But as I've told kids when when you're having a good season, this span of just a couple weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, and if you're fortunate to play in the 4th week, are some of the best memories that you can ever have as a high school player. It's just that special. So thanks again for coming out again today, and it's always good seeing you, and keep doing a good job.
I will.